Well, for our government panel discussion, which is going to be on the topic AI and public sector combining to create smart and high-performance government, we're looking at talking about digital and artificial intelligence technologies, which likely have a substantial economic and social impact. And the public sector is seeking and finding applications to improve services. Cognitive technologies could eventually revolutionize every facet of government operations. Well, this panel discussion will discuss how AI currently operates in the public sector and determines what skills and resources are needed to successfully apply it. We're looking at talking about discussing Australia's artificial intelligence roadmap. What are the sectors in government that AI will deeply impact? Artificial intelligence and Australia's ethics framework, and also developing national AI capability to boost the productivity of the Australian industry. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we're elated to be joined by eminent panelists. First up joining is Kate Harrington, NSW Government Head of Strategic Digital Initiatives. Well, Kate has over 20 years of public sector experience, including NSW Department of Industry, NSW Department of Planning, and NSW Police, Housing NSW, and at the NSW Department of Finance Services and Innovation. Thank you so much, Kate, for joining us and giving us your valuable time today at the World AI Show. Also joining us on the other side is going to be Ed Saughton, the Australian Human Rights Commission Human Rights Commissioner. Ed's area of expertise includes human rights, public law, and discrimination law. He's a fellow of the Australian Academy of Law, a member of the World Economic Forum's Global Future Council on Human Rights and the Fourth Industrial Revolution, and serves on a number of boards and committees. Thank you so much, Ed, for joining us and giving us your valuable time. Well, ladies and gentlemen, also we're going to be joined by Manohar Esarapu, the City of Port Phillip, CIO of that. Manohar is at the forefront of leading technology-led innovation and driving digital transformation initiatives. He's also led corporate venture program DNA at Bosch, working with deep tech startups. In the recent past, he worked on cross-section of topics embedding IoT, AI, and 5G. Thank you so much, Manohar, for joining us and giving us your valuable time. Also, we've got Dr. Mahesh Prakash, CSIRO Data 61 Head of Group and Senior Principal Research Scientist. Well, Dr. Mahesh leads a group of scientists, engineers, and software professionals who develop and apply a diverse range of modeling and analytics techniques for urban and peri-urban environmental applications, with a key focus on emergency and disaster management resilience and climate adaptation. Thank you so much, Dr. Mahesh, for joining us and giving us your valuable time. Also, this entire conversation is going to be moderated by Reynaldo Lugtu, the founder and CEO of Hungry Workforce. Well, Ray is a fellow of the US-based Institute of Digital Transformation and is also the chairman of the ICT Committee of the Financial Executive Institutes of Philippines and the vice chairman of the ICT Committee of the Management Association of Philippines. Thank you so much, Ray, for joining us and being a part of this incredible discussion and being the moderator. Thank you for joining us. Well, ladies and gentlemen, with this, we present our eminent panelists on your stage and screen. With this, I'd request everyone to please switch on your cameras and unmute yourself and join us at the World AI Show Australia. Thank you once again on behalf of TressCon Global. Ray, over to you from now. Thank you.
Thank you, Bhavana. No, thank you for that nice context setting on the AI prospects in Australia and as well as globally. So I welcome the panelists. No? So Kate, Ed, Manohar, and Dr. Mahesh. No? So indeed, the pandemic has accelerated digitization globally. No? So enterprises are engaging in digital transformation as well as public sector agencies. Now, we will talk about AI in the context of Australia. So Australia has been in the forefront of AI, no? As well as also containing the pandemic. We will talk about that later. But first things first, we will talk about the adoption of AI in the public sector. So, Dr. Mahesh, in your organization, I see that your organization has been doing a lot of research in the field of technology, AI as well. So, what is the adoption of AI in the public sector, specifically in Australia?
Yeah, look, I mean, my high-level view of the adoption of AI in public sector I think the adoption of existing AI tools and existing capabilities that are out there is actually quite high in Australia. So we tend to be quite good at picking up technologies that are out there and using it for various needs, also in the public sector. But in terms of innovating using AI technologies, so doing something new with AI technologies, I think we could do much better than what we are doing right now. And that is actually presented as I think that's a huge challenge for us in Australia. There are several reasons for that. I mean, open data availability is one reason, and we have done a great job of actually taking quite a few steps in moving ahead with open data, but it's still an issue, especially in the area that I work in, emergency management and disaster management. And in the next 2 or 3 years, I see quite a few benefits in going down that path.
Interesting. Yeah. So you mentioned that the adoption is robust, but there are challenges. We will talk about the challenges in a while. But Manohar, let's move to you. What are some of the what are examples of AI applications used in the public sector that you see?
Sure. Thanks, Ray. I'll talk from my vantage point what we are doing from a local council. I'll give you anecdotally some of the use cases that might give a spin. Look, by and large, we provide more than 100 services, and I'm sure it's the same with many councils. And there's always a service innovation and the cost presence on the service. So the bottom line is important. We don't work for profits. So in such a case, some of the use cases where we are using AI is, for instance, the tree mapping, the tree canopy. So we need to keep health check on the trees and the growth factors and how do we maintain and manage that. So tree canopy, mapping is a big concern, and we keep using drones, fly the drones, and start looking into the canopy side of it. Waste management, as you could now see that waste management and recycling is a big topic, and we are using video-based analytics. Early days, but that's another area where we see there's a huge opportunity for us to invest further on that. Fort Phillip, we are at 22 kilometers radius, and we have a large foreshore as well. And flooding is one of the concern in some of the areas where there's a habitual. So we do flood modeling using the likes of TwoFlow, for instance, and it's heavily regulated with a lot of data and big data behind it. All these years, we have collected a lot of data available from the likes of Bureau of Meteorology and our own local information. But what do we do with the data now? So the next logical step for us is to do a flight modeling, for instance. You might hear us talking a lot about digital twins because we have a large fleet of assets. It is up to 3 billion of assets that we maintain and manage, like some footpaths to broken footpaths to everything else, beach cleaning equipment. So we do have modeling around that, and asset management is a huge topic for us. You might see a lot of 3D modeling in the urban city planning, the shadow analysis processes, the open spaces, the greenery. So a lot of this urban planning, we're starting to use AI already. And this is a financial year. We are talking about budgets. We are talking about the next 4 or 5 years council planning, and a lot of economic growth simulations and indicators. And how do you actually project for the next 10 years? How do you actually start projecting for next 5 years for that matter? We are looking for external data and insights that we could draw from our internal data and start simulating. So if you have to reimagine the whole smart cities and the smart councils, everything boils down to some of this AI-led innovation and technology. So what I alluded is to 5 or 10% of some of the thought process, but I see a huge opportunity for a council like us to actually invest further on some of the AI-led technologies.
Interesting. Now you mentioned a lot of applications in the smart city context, urban planning, managing waste. Interesting. So Ed, in your in your agency, the Australian Human Rights Commission, in your context, what are some of the applications that you see, at least in the area that you work in?
Well, I mean, maybe I'll sort of step back one step at least. One of the interesting things about artificial intelligence, at least in 2021, is that it's allowing us to do things that we've always done, but in new ways. So what I mean by that is we're not using AI to do things out of science fiction, like teleport ourselves from one place to another. Instead, what it's allowing us to do is to make predictions and then make decisions based on those predictions, but using powerful new ways of analyzing big sources of data and finding links that we might not otherwise have found. And I think that's really significant, because what it means is that we need to make sure that those existing protections that have always been there to protect citizens or consumers when they're the subject of a decision, that those protections continue to apply effectively. And I think it's a challenge, because anywhere from any of the examples you've given that have already come up, from a bank loan decision to a decision by government to give someone a benefit or not give someone a benefit, it's critically important that those decisions are made fairly. So there's no discrimination, there's no algorithmic bias that creeps in, that any personal information is used in a way that protects and upholds people's right to privacy, and that the decision is accurate. And I know that might sound obvious, but of course the whole promise of AI is that we have better, more data-driven decisions, and often that's the case. And that's a wonderful thing. And that's why we at the Human Rights Commission are quite excited about AI, but it's not always the case. Sometimes the decision-making is less accurate. We've got to be really, really clear to make sure that we can pick up those decisions that are inaccurate or unfair and make sure that they're resolved.
Interesting. So data-driven decisions in protecting the public. Dr. Kate, let's move. Let's move to you. So Manohar and Ed mentioned a lot of opportunities. Good use of AI. What are still some of the opportunities that you see? Applications of AI as well as risk. Talk about the opportunities and risk.
Thank you, Ray. Look, all of the speakers have raised points that I've just wanted to jump on and go, yes, that's what we're doing in New South Wales, or yes, we found that issue too. So it was interesting in your introduction that you spoke about, our response to COVID and what that has enabled us to do in terms of remote working. Yeah. And the AI augmentation, automation story in New South Wales government has been one that was really just starting to ramp up before the COVID-19 crisis. And we were talking about that. So at the time, I was at the Public Service Commission, and we were talking about this in terms of work of the future. So looking at our 400,000 employees in the state and what AI would mean to them over the next 5 years and 10 years. But quickly, as we had to, all work remotely and still continue to deliver services, work of the future became the work of now. And so one of the big risks that I see with the implementation of AI, whether it be for augmentation or for automation, is that we haven't got the funding infrastructure, the skills infrastructure of our employees ready to start really harnessing the benefits. And also in terms of risk, it's something that you said about bias in the system and ensuring that the algorithm that we might be using for decision making doesn't highlight bias. One of the things that we've been trialing AI in is in the recruitment process. So actually looking at people's job applications, the role that we're recruiting for. And where we found in the pilot that the bias was coming out was not in the algorithm around the AI, but it was actually in how we were writing our job applications. The male-dominated language that we use to recruit IT actually is the filter, is the bias that starts to weed out female candidates, if you like. And it's not about identifying male versus female, it's our choice of language. So the risks are not necessarily around the technology. The risks are potentially around the capabilities of the people who work in the sector to use those effectively.
Interesting. So if in the end, Kate, it is humans that manipulate AI, that will determine, the risk and outcome of AI. I'd like to get your perspective, Dr. Mahesh. So, the risk in AI, do you have anything to add there? Is this really something that is, result in doom, in the future, just like how other, global experts foresee it?
Yeah, look, I mean, with any advancement in technology, you've got to be cautious about how you use it. And I guess one of the really good examples that I can give here is the use of AI in self-driving cars. So that technology, when it gets used in cars that are self-driving, I mean, we have heard of self-driving vehicles for a long time, and they are actually used quite a bit in the industry, like in the mining sector, for example. But despite the fact that that technology already exists, it can actually be used on our roads now. The adoption has not been as quick as one would have expected, and I guess one of the reasons for that is, how, we always, humans have a tendency to want to attribute blame. Uh, and the problem with self-driving cars is the attribution of blame is a big question mark, right? So if someone can actually argue that the car was driving me, it wasn't me who actually created the problem or the accident, then whom do you actually attribute that blame to? And this goes back to, insurance claims, all those sorts of things, right? So the I think, to me, the opportunity as well as risk presents itself in the form of how do you actually deal with the ethical aspects, the legal aspects of the technology that is being developed. And it's true in all forms of applications of AI technology.
All right. So yes. So indeed, there are risks. You spoke about the smart car example. I'd like to ask you, Manohar and Ed, in your areas in the public sector, do you see the same risk, and are there any ways to mitigate the risk? Manohar?
Look, I think there's always an element of risk in everything what we do. And as we make it more real, AI is one view, is the technology and the adoption, but in reality, when you make it real, you get to see the challenges coming up. There is no one pinpoint coming back to this autonomous vehicle driving. So who is liable if there's an accident? Is that insurer? Is the owner? Who owns the asset, sort of thing? So obviously some of these questions, but by and large, I think AI is not just AI. You were talking about people, we're talking about data, we are talking about privacy here. So by and large, if we are bound by some of the Australian privacy principles, which are pretty strong compared to other regions, and stick to some of the governance regulatory advice that we get from the likes of OVIC, for instance, Australian Information Commission. And that would drive some of your thinking, that would forefront and ask you, am I leaving a chair in my decision making for the human being who is actually going to consume this information, or whom am I actually catering to? We got to remember technology is one side of it, but the actual consumer is a human being in the society. What we do in most of our conversations is we leave an open chair in our decisions and our meetings, assuming that's a human being sitting there whom we are actually catering this service. So it's a self-induced way of looking at the risk that you're infusing it, keeping the human at the center of our decisions. I personally believe you don't need a lot of regulatory surroundings to have such decisions. It's about the lens what you wear. Yes, there is a risk, but it's also the ways of mitigating the risk is adopting some of the technologies, doing some of those proof of concepts, and start looking into at what scale can I operate, and how do I actually scale it up if I have to, and what are the real-time risks that we're looking at. Otherwise, we're looking at only the theoretical parts of AI, and rest of the world will take off, and we'll be waiting for everything else to happen driven by technology. So it's a two-way road. Don't fear regulations and risks. They are always there, and as industry leaders, I strongly advocate that just go adopt it and start looking in a smaller scale and identify the risk as you go forward.
All right. How about you, Edno? What's your perspective on this risk and how to mitigate them?
Well, it's interesting because in the kind of tech world, things have moved incredibly quickly, and that's a great thing, right? But there has been a very, I'm going to choose my words carefully here, very unusual approach taken to regulation. And what I mean by that is you've had people from Mark Zuckerberg down say things like, well, let's move fast, break things. Let's not be hamstrung by regulation. And I have some sympathy with that, in the sense that you don't want to be, in a society where regulation is actually causing harm and stopping good progress. On the other hand, if you're developing AI in an area that is actually, high risk or medium to high risk, then those laws are there for a reason. So maybe I can give an analogy that is particularly pertinent now. We've known for many, many years that you could move more quickly in developing medicine if you kind of curtailed the process of drug trials and so on, or if you trialed the use of drugs, medical drugs on people in prison, that sort of thing. We don't do that, and I'm very, very glad that we don't, because it's critically important that we protect the community whenever we're developing medicines. And in fact, we've got a really very well developed system here in Australia, but in many, many other countries that similarly are there to protect people. And we've seen how important that is in a pandemic. I think we should take the same principle, apply it when it comes to AI, especially when government uses AI in areas where there's a risk of harm. So regulation isn't just something we should, have in the back of our minds. We should be thinking really deeply about what is the law there to do. If it's there to protect people, you need to take it really seriously. And you need to make sure you're testing your AI-powered product or decision-making system so that you can be confident. You can stand back and say, no, I'm really confident that it's not going to cause harm. And then, of course, if it does cause harm, and we can't always predict things perfectly, that we have a system in place that will ensure that people are essentially, put in the position they would have been in had that error not occurred.
Interesting perspective, Ed. Kate, so yes, we understand the risk here, but let's circle back to opportunities. I think there's more opportunities that we will see in terms of the applications of AI. You may have your perspective on risk. You can share that, but what are the opportunities that can impact, that will be impacted by AI in the public sector? In what areas of public sector will be impacted positively by AI?
Thanks, Ray. I will talk about opportunities, but I can't resist the opportunity to just say a little bit about risk. And I think that Ed is absolutely right. But we also need to add to that lens a view around regulation of things that are outside our current world. And so we have a risk profile, and we can evaluate those risks based on what we know now and how we live now. But actually, as we move to greater automation, we start to see new risks that might not exist in the way that we deliver services right now. And one of those is around autonomous vehicles. Now, I was working with the chief planner a couple of years ago, and what came out in the research that he was doing was that autonomous vehicles will more than likely be subsidised by large multinational technology corporations. And therefore, you might not own your car. You'll get into your car will drive you to work. But while you're in the car, you will be subject to the advertising that vendor, that technology company wants you to see as a part of providing you with this service. And so suddenly we have a new type of government regulation where people will be signing up to a service, not necessarily knowing the implications of what it is they're choosing. Yes, would I like a cheaper car? Would I like to get to work in an autonomous vehicle? But actually what you're trading off is someone else's access to your time and what you might be confronted with during that trip in that vehicle. So I think that's a really interesting way to think about new risks as they emerge. So we used a company called Fathom And Fathom, again, is an international company that looks at the impact of AI and automation on a workforce and looks at the impact of individual roles. So we looked at it from across all of New South Wales government. And of the 400,000 people who work in New South Wales government, probably about 14,000 roles or parts of roles could easily be automated. And that sounds like quite an alarming number. So the next thing that we did was to have a look at who those people were. So it's often in places where maybe people with a disability are employed. It certainly impacts more men than women, and it also impacts regional New South Wales more than it impacts metro. So again, thinking about risk, it's not an equal blanket, we're going to make a 1% saving by using AI, and is that saving realisable? So where the opportunities lie then is in making sure that we're using AI to optimise how our workforce deliver services. So another part that Fathom were able to help us with was looking at how many of our roles could be delivered remotely. So not just via automation, but what percentage of our 400,000 people could work remotely. And it came about 30% could work remotely entirely. There was no reason for them to perhaps ever go to the office again. And I know that I'm sitting in my house with my dash hound on my lap here. Very, very happy that I didn't commute for an hour and a half to get to the office today. So, you know, we are changing the way that we work. But from a citizen's point of view and how we deliver services, the three big opportunities we've got are around process automation, sensory perception, and suggestion provision. They're the three big technologies for New South Wales. And how we go about incorporating those technologies into the service we provide and ensuring that we can have as many people, as many citizens as possible using those services. So digital AI is not necessarily for everyone. There's a large portion of our population for which it's not appropriate, and we need to make sure those people are not left behind.
All right, you mentioned three important opportunities there, Kate. Now we're done with opportunities and risk here. But Mahesh, Dr. Mahesh, let's talk about the the context of a roadmap or ethics framework. Ed mentioned about the regulatory concept a bit, but what do you see in Australia? What's the roadmap? Is there a roadmap, AI roadmap that's happening or being followed? And is there a regulatory or ethics framework that is being followed now or is going to happen soon?
Yeah, look, I mean, there have been several white papers that have been written around this. There is actually a paper that was tabled by my organization, Data 61, in collaboration with the Australian government, which specifically talks about ethics framework in AI. So I would say that there is a broad roadmap that has been developed, and I guess the specificity of that roadmap and its use will be very much dependent on where it actually gets applied, right? Because AI is now pervasive. It's being used in all sorts of areas. I guess the other thing to bear in mind is that we use this general term AI for all sorts of data analytics and modeling that people do. And the nuances associated with that is something that is only starting to come into play, because there's AI is something that can solve many problems, but it can't be used to solve. I'm talking about it from a technical sense. It can't be used to solve all the problems that exist in a modeling context, right? So one of the challenges with AI is it can't do a very good job of predicting the future, because there's no data that exists which tells you what future might look like. So there's a few challenges there as well. So I mean, we need to bear in mind that yes, we do need to keep focusing on the use of AI technology in an ethical way. We also need to be very careful about defining what AI actually means, because people have forgotten about it. They just use it in a very pervasive way now.
Okay, so yes, indeed, the AI has its shortcomings. Let's use the remainder of the time to talk about COVID. is there potential for AI to slow down, if not end, COVID-19? Manohar?
I wish I have an answer for that. Look, what I would say is, if you look at some of the modelings that have been done, I'm just following some of the trends, what's happening back home in Asia Pacific region. If you look at the first wave, second wave, kind of a thing, it might not slow down the spread, but it might give you the indications of the modeling. When is the second wave coming up? What does second wave mean for you? And what does that mean in terms of peak? When is the plateau? And we're starting to see a lot of that. And that's giving a lot of insights. Is it a micro segment contamination, or is it a micro? Where exactly we need to take those twists and turns in terms of modeling that. Where do I send my vaccinations up front, and how much I should actually order for that? This is the kind of empowerment that's happening, which I'm sure we would not have that otherwise if we don't have those models in place. So that's one side of decision making supporting. They might be right or wrong, but at least you know an indication of what's happening at a particular area. Secondly, I see, if you see what a development of a vaccination used to take 10 years or 15 years, we are bang on with 2 or 3 years, and we spoke about risk, and we are putting human lives at risk and that's the risk that humans have bitten, and there are a lot of people coming forward to take that risk and have a jab in your body. That has accelerated our thinking, and a lot of it, I believe, is some of the AI behind it. When I say AI, I'm talking about models and machine learning and all that jazz around that. COVID is a symptom, but the problem is somewhere else. So if you bring back AI to those problem statement focuses, I'm sure there's a lot to learn from this. So yes and no, yes, it's helping in a way to understand what it is, help us to present what's in future in terms of the next waves, coming waves, and when to open the economy, when not to open the economy, versus what is the risk that we are looking into in terms of the human lives. So it's helping in that context, but I can't really say whether it's really going to change the world in terms of how we are.
All right, thank you for that, Manohar. We have a question from the audience. I think Ed and Kate can answer this. From a question from Leah Dong. How seriously is the AI industry taking coding bias in AI? So coding bias, is that something you can answer, Ed?
Yeah, so I mean, there've been, I guess, a few areas where it's been particularly sort of coming up to the public attention, that sort of problem. To mention a couple, facial recognition has been a particular problem. So you have, machine learning systems that rely on big data sets of headshot photographs. What we know through the excellent work of people like Dr. Joy Buolamwini from the United States is that those systems tend to be far less accurate in identifying people with dark skin than basically anyone who doesn't look like me. So they're reasonably accurate, probably not as accurate as humans, reasonably accurate at identifying middle-aged white men. Me. But anyone who doesn't meet that description, it gets wildly inaccurate, in fact, quite quickly. There are other examples of coding bias, for example, in the financial services sector and so on. So I think we've moved some distance in starting to accept as society that there's a problem there. I am concerned, however, that companies and governments need to move faster and more diligently in addressing that problem. To give an example, the United Kingdom had used facial recognition in a number of police forces. In the most famously, the London Metropolitan Police used facial recognition to identify criminal suspects that they had pictures of, but they didn't know the names of those people. There was a 98% false positive rate, huge false positive rate, and that the first results of the trial. I would have said from that, what we need to do is we need to retool. We need to make sure that we have a really robust system in place before it then goes live again. And we need to prove to the community that it's going to be really safe before it gets used in a live scenario again. But that's not what happened. In fact, what the London Metropolitan Police did was that it has established another trial. And it hasn't kind of set out in detail what are the protections in place against those sorts of errors. Because as I say, when there's a high error rate, those errors are not experienced sort of at the same rate across the entire community. It's much more likely to be experienced by people of colour, by women, and by people with physical disability. And so I think we've got to do more to confront that reality.
All right, thank you, Ed. Kate, any addition to the code bias in general in AI?
Well, I'm not a coder, so I'll put that up front. My PhD is in sociology, so I'm lucky you guys even speak to me. But where it has been really useful, as I said in the recruitment trials that we did, it's the language that we put in. It's not the coding bias that's the problem. But where it has been useful is helping to identify people with skills that could be mobilised more quickly. So actually looking at, what does somebody who's a system designer, what kind of skills do they have? Oh, we need a different kind of skill over here. That's 95% there. How can we quickly identify them and move them on? And that has been very accurate. So yeah, I think that it depends on the context in which you're looking, but within our own workforce, it's been more on the side of how we've put the data in, not the bias in the algorithm.
All right. So it has been a fruitful discussion, everyone, panelists. So we learned a lot, the regulatory framework, opportunities and risk in AI, as well as the role of AI in fighting COVID and helping citizens in decision from government. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Mahesh. Thank you, Ed, Manohar, and Dr. Kate. I turn this over now to our host, Bhavana. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ray. Firstly, we got to give it to him for wonderfully moderating it and curating it. So thank you so much, Ray, on that. And thank you to our eminent panelists, Kate, Dr. Mahesh, Manohar, and Ed for joining us today and giving us your valuable time and kickstarting the World AI Show Australia today. We really value all what you've spoken on the panel discussion. We hope to see you around soon. Thank you once again.